Hi everyone, welcome. We're down here in my wormery, and these two systems are where we're going to start today. And these systems were really retired 22 days ago when the worms were hauled out to start two new systems, but we kept the castings around, and I've been aerating them 9 times now over the past 22 days to try to help this systems dry out, lose a little bit of their excess moisture, because it did seem to me like the best chance at us having a successful baiting of the straggler worms that still are thought to occupy this material. Well, they're known to occupy this material, because every time I stir through the stuff I could see there's worms in it. So we're just going to set up bait boxes today. There isn't a whole lot to it. It's just some bedding with some tasty food items. And you know, since I've already done 9 aerations of this material, I might as well make it 10 before we get the baiting process initiated with the bait boxes. And this will give you a chance to see how the past 22 days and 10 aerations at this point have helped the material lose a lot of its moisture content, making it a lot more granular and flaky. And here and there you can see worms within the material. As I bring up some of the stuff that's down lowest, it does seem like the worms are tending to gravitate towards those lower reaches, perhaps because there's still a little bit more moisture to be had there as the surface material dries. It's been very humid, you know, so this drying process has taken a lot longer than it would have, say, in the winter time when the furnace is drying out the air in my house. But with the very damp, humid air in the house lately, it has definitely resulted in a slow process of moisture evaporating out of these systems, even though they've just been sitting here completely uncovered. So as we put in these bait boxes, I do like to submerge them ever so little, so I am just going to create a little bit of a recess into which we can place these things. And even though I prepare my bedding, this shredded paper cardboard combo, with moisture, I dampen the stuff as I'm making it, as I combine all the ingredients. I still think a little bit more moisture would definitely be beneficial, and I do believe that that's a key component of the strategy of trying to let the material in which the worms reside get pretty dry. And what is with the switch on this thing or the trigger? The worms have been getting subjected to a environment that's been gradually getting drier and drier on them, and now the stuff that's getting placed here on the surface with the delicious foods in it also brings with it a really nice moisture level, hopefully resulting in a material that the wormies are going to appreciate once they roll in to check out what's on the scene. So much so that they just remain in the material, or at least that's the game plan. So that's it. We've started baiting here 22 days after conducting the haul out of the worms that occupied this stuff, but I've also got feeding for the majority of the population that did get hauled out on day 22 days ago to launch 2 new systems. We already came into those systems on day 12 to give them a feeding. And today it's only been 10 days later, but it did seem to me like, based on everyone's estimates, we're dealing with a couple systems that have over 3,000 worms living in them. So hopefully they're ready for another feeding today after 10 days. Well, let's get those systems out here on the bench in the place of these, and we'll see how they're coming along. My supply of bedding's running a little bit low, so I've got some stuff here to help complement the feeding zones. So we'll use a little bit of my prepared bedding. Since I'm running kind of low, I wouldn't want to deplete what I have there. But since those napkins are so huge, 2 of those napkins going into each system in itself is already going to count as a fairly good size application of bedding. So I'm just going to also reuse these feeding zone indicators. These coffee filters resting here across the middle are really just meant to show where we last fed. And it's just like a little tradition in my wormery to set those up. And you know, I'm not liking what I'm seeing in here as far as flying insects go. I definitely see a lot of flying insect activity. And I think the first order of business is going to be to come in with some of my mosquito dunks. And as we work through the system, this stuff will get blended in, and it does seem like it's been doing a pretty good job preventing the flying insects from going crazy, occupying all my worm bins. But they do seem to sneak in here and there, and perhaps I'm just not being as diligent in the application of this stuff. So this is even more of that prepared bedding. 22-day-old systems are probably still mainly bedding, mainly the materials of which we built the systems. And these systems are definitely quite young. Let's start excavating down the middle. That's where we fed, and that's a good place to expect to find a little worm party going on over here, as well as some leftovers of the foods we gave them last time. Not to mention leftovers of foods that even accompanied the worms from their old homes, like these. There's going to be another one in the other system, I assume. There's half of a mango seed, and possibly some other stuff too. You know, let's get caught up in bin number 2, where we did a little bit of outer edge aeration, just to take a peek at how things look. I'm somehow getting this sense like perhaps the material here in bin number 2 is perhaps slightly more abundant, as if it's thicker somehow. And I already felt something comparable to what I encountered in bin number 1, was that half of the other half of that mango seed. And not too surprising, we're seeing a similar little worm party happening down here in the middle of the system where the food was last placed 10 days ago. Definitely seeing leftovers of it, but that's okay. To me, it just felt like after 22 days at this point, it was high time to get the migration, or not the migration, because I treat the migration in an active system as one way to round up worms. What we just set up in the boxes of finished castings that these worms left behind from their previous environment are just baiting activity. Somehow, I don't know why, treat that as different. And yeah, lots of worms. These systems are still pretty new. People are still offering their suggestions as to how many worms they believe occupy each system. But I do believe that the rough numbers are somewhere up in the neighborhood of 3,100 worms in each system, give or take. And at some point, I think once the estimates that I get from people in the comments start to settle down and I see fewer of them, and I expect it to not change too much anymore, I'll announce the actual calculated averages of everyone's guesstimates. But for now, I'm just giving you a rough number just so you have a sense of how many worms live in these systems. You can almost tell just from when we probed around through the feeding zone how many worms were there. And coming back pretty soon after the last feeding, the way we're doing here today, also has a tendency to result in pretty good little worm spotting session, with the worms still attempting to work down the delicious foods they'd been given previously. So, like I said, these nice new replacement feeding zone indicators will be put across the top to show where we last fed, but these old ones that we were using previously are going to get repurposed as also supplemental bedding down in the feeding zones. So we've already put in one napkin, we've put in some of my prepared bedding, we're also now resting in a coffee filter, and I've also got another napkin still, so let's not forget to give them that. But here I figured let's also get the last of this melon rind in here. Mostly cantaloupe melon rind, but a little bit of watermelon rind in there as well. So I'm trying to think, is there anything else? Yeah, duh. I was just telling myself not to forget. But airhead me, it wouldn't have been surprising if I had actually started to backfill the feeding zone without placing in this final piece of paper. So, trying to go a little bit light on the use of my prepared bedding. So I've still got to make some more. I don't even have any shredded paper, cardboard, anything right now with which I'd be able to replenish my supply. So even before I could start making some of my prepared bedding to restock, I would first even have to start by shredding. So I got some work to do, and that's the reason I'm kind of goofing off with that. One of these days I'll just dedicate a little bit of time to getting the shredders out. Well, I usually do it with one shredder. Getting the shredder out and getting some of this stuff prepared. But it is a good motivator for me to try to deplete my excessive inventory of napkins and other things that are just laying around by not having the prepared bedding right there on hand. So that looks pretty good. Alright, we had newspaper top coverings, which are still holding up quite good. I don't know if these were like still brand new on day one or if they came in during the last check-in. They're definitely holding up well. But as time goes on and these start to break down to the point where they don't really hold together as a single piece of material anymore, they'll also get the same treatment as the coffee filters that had been our feeding zone indicators previously. They'll get repurposed as supplementary bedding down in the feeding zones as well. So that's it for our check-in with the 22-day-old African nightcrawler systems. A little bit of an insect situation going on when we first arrived. Hopefully the treatment of the BTI mosquito dunks will help get that situation under control. And now today they're getting there was a feeding put in before the worms were introduced. There was a feeding on day 12. Now there's a feeding on day 22, 10 days later. And I think things are looking pretty good, but after a bunch of melon, it's reasonable to think that we'll probably be back here again pretty soon to get these guys fed again. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.